Good evening, everyone. My name is Murray Patterson, and I'm the current chairman of the Paddle Steamer Preservation Society Scottish branch. I welcome you one and all to this virtual meeting of the branch, and I'm sure we are all very glad not to be out on a stormy night like this to visit a hall. This evening, it's my pleasure to welcome Paul Semple, Waverley's General Manager, who will outline the story of how Waverley was prepared for the 2021 season, sharing many previously unseen images of the ship in Drydock. Paul will also share highlights of the 2021 sailing season, giving the inside story of how the season was managed and the various issues which arose and were dealt with to ensure Waverley's continuation in operation. At the end of this presentation, there will be a chance to speak to Paul and ask him in a Q&A session. So please bear that in mind. But at the moment, I'm very pleased to be welcoming Paul again to us this evening. And I would now hand over to him, and I'm sure we'll all very much looking forward to what he has to say. Paul, it's all yours.
Thank you, Murray, and good evening to folks watching. I'll just share my screen so we can start with the PowerPoint. Before I do get started, just two small apologies. First one, this is a week later than it was initially planned, but COP26 impacted on the starting Waverley's winter refit and the office being closed during the period. And I do have a slight cough. I will try to make sure I don't cough, but if I do happen to mute for any period of time, then that will be the reason. Okay. So the outline, what I plan to do then is I'll cover the refit work in early spring 2021, particularly showing images of the Drydock and the bow repair, and then preparations for sailing, and then a bit on the season, just rounding off with the current refit work that's already underway. Now I need to just thank everyone who supported the COVID-19 relief appeal, because if it hadn't been for the success of the COVID-19 relief appeal, Waverley would not have been able to enter service in 2021. And just to share with you the various funds that came in, we had publicly ran an appeal to raise 350,000 for individuals, and that target was reached. There was then gift aid on top of those donations that came to a total of 75,000. We also benefited from trusts and foundations giving over 128,000. We also got visitor attraction funding through Visit Scotland at 64,000, and then Friends of Waverley in the period of the winter gave 35,000. And if you do add that up pretty quick, then you realise that it's 650 thereabouts that was given through COVID relief funding. We will say that Waverley needs 400, 450 for a winter refit. That's purely on the ship, but the company needs towards $1 million to survive between one season and the next. So picking the story up in March 2021, and there was a paddle replaced before Waverley moved to Drydock, and just a photograph there of old timbers come out and new timbers preparing to go in to replace one of the floats. And then a photograph of during and then after the new timbers had gone in. There was deck repairs. There is forever deck repairs to be done. We're back doing deck repairs again just now. But last year, or sorry, earlier on this year, it was the aft port sponson, which received quite a bit of new decking. So the picture to the left shows the decking up, picture to the right, new decking down before all the pitch was trimmed off. Crew mess room, not an area the passengers see. It's in the port sponson aft, just opposite the engine room. And this is a photograph with the seating already removed. You can see there the marks on the decking where the seating previously been. But if you look particularly down on the deck, you'll see there's some corrosion and there was some thin steel plates there. We had surveyed the steel to assess its thickness and found several patches where the steel was thin and needed to be replaced. There's a unit in the mess room with a fridge and a sink, etc., and all that was removed as well before the ship moved to Drydock. We had replaced the HP piston rings during last winter. That's a photograph of the new rings having arrived from the manufacturers down south. But unfortunately, when they arrived, they weren't just quite right. and they had to go back again. Unfortunately, it was very tight turnaround times because we had to have them in to get the ship to Drydock. So despite it being a 5-month order, it came down just to a few days spare to get them in for the ship prepared to steam, because we wanted her to sail downriver rather than be towed. 21st of April, and she left Glasgow under her own power to sail down and go into Drydock. A photograph there of her leaving Glasgow. In order to get into the Garvel, she does need a tux to take her across from Custom House Quay to position her ready to go into the Garvel. There's some nice drone pictures there of her. Like I say, the tug at the bow will then come clear before Waverley is pulled along herself into the Drydock. And a picture of there sitting on the blocks. You can see the blocks just under the keel. Not quite emptied out the full dock, but not far off it. And that was a bit of evening light on her. Following morning work began. So ahead of going to Drydock, the operations director, Alistair, he's got to prepare a Drydock spec, and then we've got to agree with the yard what works we expect to be done and agree the pricing. And that's sort of built up. It usually takes a couple of months back and forward. And we finally agree the work scope. This year we did all 76 of the ship's side valves, and they're on a 5-year survey. Going forward, we'll actually split that survey period up rather than being every 5 years to do all of them. There was just touch-up needed on the anti-fouling underwater, but went for a full hull repaint, both the black, the cream, the gardenia as it's called, and we decided to opt for new yellow on the lines just to make them a little bit stronger. There were several paddle floats replaced, the bow repair, which is a major bit of work. There was the mess room, as I mentioned, the steel repairs. There was some stern railings needing repaired, engine room painting, and there is a fire pump room that's down next to the lower bar, and that was getting repainted as well. So it's quite a large scope of work. She was booked in for 3 weeks, and there was another vessel just in ahead of her, which was in for the same period of time. There's a photograph of the mess room once it's been attacked, and you can just see they're looking towards just below the porthole to the left. You can see there's a bit of open steel where some has been cut. That's just looking in to the side of the mess room there. You can see just looking through the deck, you can see the ship's hull open and the dock below. This photograph I got by literally just sticking my head down through the hole to see into the port paddle wheel, just looking forward. And that's before the staging was up round about the paddle floats for replacing some of the floats. And there's the same bit of steel with new steel going in. And then after the steel had been replaced. And then the mess room was given a bit of refurbishment. And eventually it ended up more like that, which was a vast improvement on what it had been before. We do have to keep refurbishing and replacing as we go. There is one area in the ship this year that really needs attention, and that's the crew utility room, which is on the starboard sponson aft, just next to the shop. That area is probably the poorest area on the ship, and we really do have to refurbish that this winter. We're currently awaiting quotes to come in for doing that. Some of the 70 odd valves dismantled. It kind of amazes me that so many bits and pieces, but yet the name Waverley was spelt wrong. There's just L-Y sitting there, but nevertheless, they all went back in. And as soon as the ship was in, the following morning, scaffold started to be erected around the bow. So you had to obviously remove the damaged steelwork and the cement, which had been put in as a temporary repair, and then starting to cut away the steelwork. There wasn't quite as much cut away in the end as what we initially thought there could be. But stage by stage, the damaged steelwork was removed. And you can see there how the staging is built round about. That's a view looking through from into what would be the paint locker. So if you imagine the forward bar on the ship, and you were just to keep on going at that level, that's what you eventually come to, into the paint locker. And you can see there the forward section of the bow completely open at that point. And by that stage, all the damaged steel work around the bow was away. And then with this picture, it's starting to build up the new plate work. You can just see there through the scaffolding that there's new plate work going in with the dummy rivets going on, which are just slightly bigger than the other rivets on the ship. And then plating up on the starboard side. And then the steelwork nearing completion with just the top bulwarks to go. Giving an undercoat. You can see there the rivets quite clearly, the dummy rivets. And then applying the top coats of paint. That picture just ever so slightly shows you the old yellow and the new yellow. Just to the left, the yellow there's a bit stronger, and to the right, approaching the grey, it's a little bit more faded. And then just inside the bow, from the bulwarks area. And then looking in through the paint locker on the inside before it was repainted. And then after being completely painted on the inside. And then a finished bow. There are other works I mentioned. There was painting inside the engine, and this shows part of the engine framework there with new paint being applied. Some of the auxiliary equipment in the engine also painted. And then there was some paddles. In fact, there was 6 paddle floats replaced. That's one that's due to come out with a big X marked on it. And then a new board for a ship called Waverley without an E at the end again. And then that's one of the new floats going in. So you can see that each float is made up of 4 timber boards, 4 Pepe boards, and then various brackets to support the float. See again, that's on the port wheel. You can see there was 2 of those floats being replaced. That's the steelwork underneath from where the crew mess room. And that area, we'd found a bit of detachment of paintwork, so it was taken back to steel and then recoated. Tend to find that the aft of the paddle wheels is where you're going to get more wear and tear, obviously with the water coming through the wheels. And a picture there just showing the yellow going on, the decorative work on the paddle box. And other painting. So just touch up on the anti-fouling under the water, but a full coat of black and gardenia was given. And there she's quite close to completion. Wee subtlety, but the yellow lines were slightly extended from where they had been in the past. And we took them back to the rear porthole at the stern. So if you look back at pictures prior to 2021, you'll see that the yellow lines were slightly extended. That possibly could just do with being just a tad further astern, just to be perfect to what 1947 appeared to be, where the lines went to the rear porthole. This is looking at deck timber, where there would have been a life raft cradle. And when we were putting the life rafts back on, we discovered that the timber underneath on the starboard side was rotten. So this became an emerging works when we were in. We were fortunate able to get the boat builders to come down and replace the timber for the life rafts on. But the thing with Drydock is there'll always be emerging works, variation orders, as the yard will call them, and you don't want too many of them, or okay if they're cheap ones, but when they start to come at 4 and 5 figures, that's when it starts adding to the cost of the refit. That picture there just showing her sitting in the dock, you can see there that there's another vessel just in front of her. One final job was left over from the previous visit in 2020 was the fitting of the TV aerial to the main mast. And this is a crew member having come down, fitted the TV aerial, but we'll just return to that later. And she's just about to be refloated there, not quite probably lifting off the blocks, but certainly the dock is flooding. and then her at Custom House key having left the yard looking fresh. Now this was May, and at this point it was still uncertain as to when we would enter service. There was still obviously COVID restrictions in place. There was a bit of a timeline of how they were going to be eased, but it was still far from certainty. And arriving back in Glasgow the same day that she'd left the Garvel dock. The old paddle timber, you see there what's old and what's new, but the old paddle timber was held because we had people willing to purchase it, and everyone that purchased a board effectively paid for a new board, because the price that was charged for the old board is the same price that were purchased the new ones for £120. And thank you to everyone who purchased, because we virtually sold out of them. In other words, your purchases paid for the new floats. Just to give you an idea of Drydock costs, the total bill came in at 218,000. That included the bow repair works, about 58, and that goes to insurance. So 160,000 for Waverley, not too bad, but pretty average. If we were to get 150, I'd be okay. Dock rental costs, various costs in terms of connecting supplies, fire hydrants, etc., preparing the dock, 24,000. Hull cleaning, painting, 22. The crew mess steelwork, which might not seem a very big area, but it was 21,000. Paddle work, 25. And the emergency works were only 15,000 this Drydock. Compare that to the boiler refit, where the emerging works were several hundred thousand. So drydocking is not cheap. Now, during that time, we had opened our Amazon wish list, and we were starting to receive plenty of things coming in. And thank you to everyone who had purchased and therefore sent in items. Quite a lot of this was for crew. The crew mess room having been refurbished, so the likes of the microwave and the toaster. And there was bedding, various things like varnish as well, all required, so it saved us having to purchase. At the same time, we ended up publishing 2 new books, and that was starting to bring in some cash in terms of the boiler book and the new Waverley book. Both of these having been supplied by the PSPS Scottish branch, and therefore everything that comes from that is going straight to Waverley. Now, at the same time as being in Drydock, we were trying to plan for a timetable, but the timetable planning had actually started way back in December 2020. And that was at that time, when there was not the new lockdowns, we had once again started to plan for a full season. And you can see there the outline which had initially been planned. It would total up to 120 operating days, starting in the Clyde, then up to Oban, Mull and Skye, before return to the Clyde, Liverpool, Bristol Channel, South Coast, Thames. The last 3 years, we have fully planned UK timetables, and so far have not been able to complete them. So in timetable planning, we're looking for special events, one-off specials that we can do, always trying to avoid ferry clashes. And we'll look back at previous revenue and passenger loadings, what worked well, what didn't, where was there maybe a surprise loading, can we benefit from that again? Got to consider hours of rest for the crew and light steaming. Also want to keep light steaming as low as possible. We do try to be quite inventive in how we avoid light steaming. There was a couple of sailings this year that were new, and they were a little bit different from the past, and it was to avoid some light steaming. And then there's a lot of time taken up liaison with ports and piers to confirm berth availability, particularly the berths that have the ferries, so that they're comfortable with the timings for Waverley. One change this year was, for example, at Drydock, where we introduced 10 minutes alongside, just because it does take that bit of time to get people off, clear the berth, and then board passengers coming on. What I tend to do with the Clyde timetable, just because there was quite a bit of change this year from previous, is grid it out so I can start to see patterns. And we had a sort of pattern between Thursdays and Saturdays, which this little picture illustrates, where I've got the coloured boxes for the Saturdays, and I'm trying to see how would it work in terms of Kilcreggan calls, because I think I'm colour coding there. is that the blue is Kilcreggan calls, and I'm trying to see how does it pattern out, because I didn't want her to be there Thursday and Saturday side by side. I want to spread it so it was a sort of alternate weeks, and I find that quite helpful, just trying to visualise how the times fit together. But I'm looking at obviously off service days, varieties of cruises, numbers of calls each pier, you know, so that it's fairly based on what you know you're going to get from piers. Obviously, the stronger piers you go to more often. But the one surprise issue was that the Clyde Coast communities really did support the ship. So initially we worked, once we knew that the lockdown had come and there was restrictions in again in the spring, we worked on the basis of the 18th of June to start with, and the timetable was initially drafted, but it was never released for the 18th of June. We ended up slipping that back 1 week, or less a week, to the 24th. And that was really the one where we set it in stone that we're aiming for the 24th. We opened bookings on the 14th of June at 5 p.m. and just within 5 hours of over £25,000 worth of tickets had sold through the website. But with the continuing uncertainty due to COVID, we initially just published the timetable up to the 22nd of August, not really knowing whether or not she could go south or not, because there still was quite a lot of uncertainty. After all, we were looking to enter service within the restrictions for physical distancing that still have to be maintained. However, there was a shortage of crew that delayed the first sailing until the 29th of June. Fortunately, that was the only shortage of crew that altered a sailing after we'd published it, because it was just a few days that we lost there at the start. Unfortunately, most passengers that had booked for the opening days transferred to other sailings, which was much appreciated, rather than just a refund. So once you've got the timetable, you've got to set the fare. And just to give you an idea of what we estimated to start this season, the average costs were going to be, and their crew and fuel, much for muchness, although it turned out crew was more than fuel in the end, berthing dues, running repairs, catering, shop stock, and then marketing cost. So you're therefore setting to aim to try and bring in 12,000 per day on a Clyde timetable, set at a 250 footfall. Now we had the maximum at 300, but aiming to get 250 so that she could just cover her costs and no more if there was 250. Based on that, the average Clyde fare came out at £36. And then there's roughly a target we had of £10 on board spend, and pleasing that that was exceeded this year, particularly in the catering and then the shop, very well as well. Basically, we sort of benchmark against a 2-hour cruise. That is your sort of, you know, the kind of obviously the least length of time on board, and the fares increase the longer you're on board. And this year, a 2-hour cruise was generally set at £26 for an adult. And then we can expect special offers where there's likely to be spare capacity. And that's where you introduce some kids go free or senior discount offers. Marketing this year, we didn't have to go too heavy because of the fact we were at such restricted capacity. But we found that our e-newsletter is probably the best marketing tool we have in terms of the response we get, because the company holds 100,000 emails. And the WL website gets a large number of hits, particularly through the operating season. Social media channels were used, Facebook in particular. Facebook through August, our Facebook had 1.6 million impressions through August. Twitter, Instagram, and then the new one introduced by the purser was TikTok videos. And there are a few TikTok videos on our TikTok channel. And then there's the standard printed timetables, brochures and flyers. And they have to be rattled out quite quickly, because when we were publishing the timetable, it was go fast, and getting brochures and flyers produced takes a bit of time, but we managed. And then there's press releases, press ads. More local than national, but we still did some press ads. We do still see a response from press ads, even though press circulation obviously is much, much lower than it used to be. But the regular sort of contact was through Facebook, where it was almost daily postings of news updates or pictures from the ship. There were some limited posters produced for some of the smaller villages around the Clyde coast. In total, is about just over 80 press ads, producing this, as I said, mostly for the local papers. 30,000 brochures printed, 17,000 of those were mailed out direct, because we still have the mail database. That was the Scottish database for people that are happy to receive the hard copy brochure. And there was promotions through Facebook, including Glasgow Live. Now, the fact that really from the second week in June until the second week in August, there was part of almost every day that was sold out. So we were getting the reach. And examples of the initial brochure and then the extended Clyde sailings brochure. And one of the posters, and then an example of a press ad that was produced. And all the marketing materials all produced in the Glasgow office. We don't have any subcontractor or anyone, it's all done by staff in the Glasgow office. Crewing. The crewing remained quite a difficult challenge throughout the season. We have to operate with a minimum of 19 crew required for the muster list, but we aim to get to 25. And that's really because we aim to have one extra deck rating, an extra engine room rating from the muster list, and then some extra catering from the muster list. Takes it up to 25. Now, 3 deck officers on the Clyde, one must hold a Clyde pilotage exemption. Now, prior to 2021, in the company, we had 2 masters holding the Clyde pilotage exemption, and then very fortunate, the chief officer, permanent chief officer, was able to gain his Clyde pilotage exemption, which really meant that we could operate a Clyde season. And he was doing that at the same time as preparing the ship for service, which was quite an ask, but very fortunate that he did get the Clyde pilotage. Recruitment. Hopefully you've always got some returning crew, although this year we had less than the previous, due to mainly Brexit, where you normally have some Eastern European crew come over for the deck ratings, catering ratings, and we were starting quite low on returning crew. There's some word of mouth, and I was fortunate in getting some crew because somebody on board and there was someone else. Agencies, I ended up with 3 different agencies in the end were able to help. There was a phone call I had quite early on in the year with one agency, and when I called up to discuss what they could supply, and they said, we just can't supply anyone to you this year, which was when I realised this is going to be tough to be able to go out on my own. But say 3 agencies in the end were able to provide crew. What I found was if I was to phone up, if they didn't come back to me within a few hours, they didn't have anyone. But it did feel it was very hand to mouth with crew at times. We also advertised. We were fortunate in getting some people coming through ads that Waverley Excursions had placed themselves, and some people just approach the company and approach and get in touch because they're interested. So we really need all possible channels. Looking back, there was a total of 54 crew served on the ship during the operating season. And for it only being an operating season across 7 to 8 days, effectively was the start to the end in terms of number of days timetabled. That was reasonably high turnover at times, particularly in the catering. And even though we were aiming for 10 catering crew, it was only 5 days out of all 71 days operated where we actually had 10 catering crew. So that meant for almost the whole season, we were searching for more catering crew. And then in terms of resourcing the crew and things that you've got to deal with, crew contracts, uniforms have got to be arranged before crew arrive, their travel's got to be arranged. Sometimes there's external training, the STCWs is the standard safety courses that the crew must have. There was letters had to be issued because of COVID restrictions, allowing people to travel. Same for anyone coming out with the UK, there was letters had to be issued from the company, but check certification is valid, and then there's obviously payroll. Waverley Excursions doesn't have a human resource department. Again, it just comes down to staff in the Glasgow office picking up various aspects of the crewing. And the fact that that was an extra job on top of other things that kept reoccurring due to the crewing issues. The crew started early June, and one of the jobs early on with the deck crew was getting external seating moved and then cleaning decks. So we initially had employed the deck crew, engineers, and a couple of catering just to start off with, to start preparing the ship. And then she was going to do sea trials. see the benches haven't moved out. And then the deck's cleaned, benches back. So she started sea trials on the 8th of June, and there was 4 days in total. As well as it been sea trials to test the work that had been done on the main engine, it also gave new crew opportunity because there was berthing trials as well. So to become familiar with how Waverley handles and berths. We had to go and have a trial berthing at Drydock following the incident in 2020. Leading up to that, there had been quite a lot of dialogue between Waverley Excursions and CMAL that own the pier. Our navigational risk assessments had to be reviewed and accepted by CMAL, and there was a few meetings held by video call, and then we also went over prior to the ship going to meet with staff in Drydock just to discuss, essentially just to make sure that the way Waverley approaches the pier and berths is the best way and most functional way for the ship, and it is. The fact that she does come in and then stop on that east berth. Inside, there's still quite a lot going on. You can see there's various parts of the ship taking shelter in the aft deck shelter. The steps, for example, on the paddle boxes there, you can see they're taken in just to save them weathering through the winter months. Some parts of Waverley ended up in crew members' houses. They were taken home, and that is the bridge dodgers. And it was the chief officer that took charge of them, because he did a great job with the bridge and revarnishing. And the crew got to task. Fortunately, the weather was good in early June, stripping down the bridge. And then new varnish applied. And then the bridge dodgers that you saw in the photograph prior, back in position. And it really does look good. Can get that standard of varnish work across the ship, but it's a never-ending task. We've got new volunteers recently started who are now onto the task of varnishing or sanding and scraping, and they've certainly started on the ongoing task. So other things just covered behind the scenes, insurance, that was a bit of a concern. Our insurance for hull, for example, normally renews in May. And this year we couldn't initially find any insurer to take on the ship. Not because of anything that happened, but the change in the insurance market, particularly COVID, and a reservation about taking on a one-ship company. We had to end up buying time, as it were, and extending the prior insurance for an extra week till we found new hull insurance. Early quotes came in at crazy prices, where it just wouldn't be viable. Up to several £100,000 for hull insurance alone. But fortunately, in the end, our insurance broker did find one syndicate prepared to take a one-ship operation. The safety management system, that's how we operate the ship, and that is maintained through the Director of Safety. That's forever being updated, and there's been quite a bit of change over last winter. A sort of reflection of us moving on from Drydock, and there was quite a lot of change to the paperwork. The MCA are also involved in terms of certification prior to sailing. That takes quite a bit of time for the crew to prepare for MCA attendance. And then there's audits during the season. So while we may have our partial certificates issued, as we did June, there was then follow-up audits later on in the operating season. And you expect now an audit, there's always be some work to do because of things picked up, which you would expect. Then there was office staff recruitment, because we had been through last winter slightly reduced office staff. In the course of the season this year, we actually ended up taking on 3 different temporary staff at various times. One of them has now become permanent, but we did lose a long-standing member of staff who has changed job. There's the ever-ending handle of inquiries and ticketing. It does seem very easy now to email and ask a question. We can expect in the operating season on a Monday morning to go in and find several hundred emails, and it does take time for us to work through, especially when it's only 1 or 2 members of staff that are dealing with all those emails as well as other aspects in the office. There's also been interaction with the Marine Acts Investigation Branch through Drydock. We've had various correspondence with them. We are still awaiting the first full draft of their report. It is expected soon, and once we've had that, we then get to feed back into that, and there'll be a further review of it before it is finally published, but that's ongoing. And therefore, I can't really make much comment about the outcome from the Drydock incident, just because it hasn't been published yet. COVID gave us a lot of extra work. Having to produce a COVID risk assessment, as businesses have to do now, operating procedures based on that risk assessment, and then we'd liaison with local authorities. To my surprise, after we had published the timetable, I think it was only a couple of days after, I got a phone call from one local authority who said that their executive had considered Waverley shouldn't be operating. They had interpreted the government's restrictions in a way that meant Waverley wouldn't operate. I had to therefore go to the Scottish Government for clarity, and the interpretation wasn't quite right. Waverley was able to operate under the restrictions. There's a lot of work in managing pasture bookings because you're trying to maximise numbers on board up to your capacity, but you cannot oversell. And with Waverley's sailing's been such that people are on and off through a sailing, then you've got multiple parts of the day, and it's trying to watch the numbers don't oversell. So we'd generally be checking that through the day, and then again later in the evening, because people quite often would buy, quite often in the evening you see early evening people are buying tickets. There was the ongoing crewing issues, because even once you have a full crew on board, some people maybe, for example, can't stay for a long period of time, or they might get another job offer, or they might have personal issues, and that became a constant where it just felt like that we were always having to look for further crew. But there was some crew that did the full season, full credit to them, and they served the ship well, but we did go through quite a bit of crew, but nature of the industry at this moment. There's always dealing with suppliers for both catering and shop supplies. We found there was issues later on into the season where, for example, one day the brewery couldn't deliver. Friday in Glasgow, they had a shortage of drivers. We then had to try and find a different supplier, and these problems are just dealt with. Arranging fuels ongoing and sourcing parts, and that comes down a lot to the operations director, who feels like he's always searching for another part for Waverley. Day before the first sailing, and she's ready. Fan boards up, ready for the sailing, which started on Tuesday at the end of June. One of the last minute things to get installed though was the donor wall from the boiler refit appeal, and that is now up on board. So everyone that donated who allowed us to include their name will be on the donor wall. Photograph over as she was heading down to Largs without any pastures the evening before the first sailing. And then day one, finally in service, and what a day to start. Glorious weather, happy passengers. And the following day, the Scotsman had Waverley as their front cover. The Clyde season benefited from some excellent weather throughout July. Mainly the weather was pretty reliable, which produced some great photographs of the ship. A favourite remains certainly steaming through the Kyles of Bute, or round Bute. And at Tinnabrook Pier. Coming into Rothesay. We saw some good loadings as well from Rothesay. As I said, the Clyde Coast community really came out and supported the ship. And even the small piers like Kilcreggan. There will be also some pastures coming around from Helensburgh to Kilcreggan to join, but good loadings from Kilcreggan. An afternoon cruise in Loch Long and Loch Goyle, which she was built to do. And she made it to Campbelltown twice during the summer season. A photograph of her end on Campbelltown Loch. And after the restrictions had eased in August, then there was regular cruise ships at Greenock. and quite frequently, if Waverley was heading up, particularly on a Thursday evening to Greenock, then she'd be passing a departing cruise ship. Now, there was a few technical challenges in the season. The first main one being the windlass shaft, which failed without any warning. That was at the end of July. So you're suddenly faced with having to manufacture a new windlass shaft. And this is really where the operations director and the technical superintendent spoke to each other to find an organisation that can produce, to get the drawings made, to arrange for it to be taken from the ship, new one produced, then brought. Now, unusually, the windlass shaft, the windlass came back by sailing upriver without Waverley. It was taken to Clydebank and then brought upriver to the ship to then be lifted aboard. In fact, though, this was all done in just 4 days from having to get the old one off, new one manufactured and then installed. And then also MCA had to witness that it was working and it was capable of lifting the anchor. Another issue we had was with the vacuum bump. And I've just taken a wee screenshot there of the message that were on our website. We did end up cancelling sailing. We cancelled 2 sailings, in fact, because of this. You can just see there in the photograph, I just looked at it, damaged metal. And actually part of the Kinghorn valves was damaged. So that then meant new pieces being manufactured. And what we tried to do, though, is communicate as quickly as possible with passengers when there has been an alteration to a sailing. And we'd normally go straight to passengers who have pre-booked, let them know, then update the website, then update the social media. And you can see that that particular update has been put on just after midnight. So we will always try and update as soon as we possibly can when we're aware of any issues. And then the new parts going in. And that was 2 days lost due to that issue. We had some very popular days, though, in particular one day where the ship had recorded their 1807 passengers being recorded. And you can see that's an extract from the personal return for the day when Waverley did the Tinnebrewer Pier Association fundraising cruise, which was a great success. You can see there on that cruise, there was 490 passengers carried. We had a 500 limit. And if I just read the personal return there, then it was 366 boarded at Tinnebrewer on that Saturday. Fantastic support. With the Drydock charter, here's a photograph the purser had taken, who was making up a fan board for a Drydock, so we didn't have one. And then Waverley sailed into Drydock and there was a big welcome. There was several hundred people there on the quayside to welcome her. The Old McBrain's bus. Scottish Canals that had permitted the berthing, they really went to some effort, and there was a local craft stalls there as well. So it was quite an event, the Drydock Day, which was, of course, the PSPS Scottish Branch Charter on the 15th of August. And a picture over there as the first passengers start to walk ashore. Quite like this, there was the Waverley shuttle, and there's a West Coast Motors bus there with a little Waverley icon on its indicator at the rear. Now, I have to record that Captain Chris Spencer, who was in command of Waverley on the 15th of August, sadly passed away last week. Chris was on for a week in August as master, and his final day in command was the 15th of August. And it's quite sad that Chris has left us quite quickly. I found Chris to be a master who was always the one that would say, don't pencil me in, but phone me. And if you phoned Chris, it used to be, oh yes, when do you need me? And in any time where we really needed him, Chris was able to step in, and his funeral is next week. We had the PSPS patrons, Timothy West and Pamela Scales there on the bridge. Tim taking to the wheel. Now, it became apparent to me that by mid-August, we were seriously going to struggle to crew Waverley to mid-October, as we had hoped to take her south. I was almost certain that if we had gone south, we would have days where we would not have had enough crew, possibly much longer, which could have resulted in the ship being down south with no crew to operate her, or not enough crew to operate her. There just was no certainty at all. It almost looked certain that we would not have. And that's when we took the decision to just extend the Clyde season. We really do want to get her back south, but this year it was just going to be too far because there was going to be gaps in the crewing. So we extended the Clyde season until September the 19th. And that meant then there was a quick timetable had to be quickly produced, liaison reports and peers, get the fares, get the brochure, and then get it out and publicised. But there's still some nice days to be had. That photograph appeared on many different platforms. Various press picked it up, photographed by someone local in Greenock. I quite like the captions that appeared, Beauty and the Beast. Unfortunately, it was Waverly that was the beauty. Dolphins, it does feel that 2021 was the year of the dolphin. We were regularly seeing dolphins, particularly around Greenock, and the ship's purser would regularly film, take photographs, and they became a bit of a star attraction. There was one day, Saturday, I was in the office and a phone call came from the Herald. We'd like to speak to the media department. Yes, you are speaking to them. Could you give us a statement about dolphins? And this was just interest. Now, just to mention that we do have Waverley dolphins for sale in the shop. There's been a new supply come in and they are on sale. But that proved very popular with passengers and crew. Mentioned the TV aerial in Drydock. Well, it didn't last the whole season and it started to come off. So there had to be a quick get a crane to reaffix the TV aerial to the main mast. Throughout the season, we were playing Diamond Waltz for Waverley, which of course is to raise funds in support of the ship for Diamond Jubilee in '75. And there's a photograph with Ross Miller to the left of the picture, and then Callum Edwards, who were both the key to producing the track. Ross Miller wrote it. It was Callum's idea to start with. There was also the PSPS Grand Draw, where it will be drawn tonight. And there's a picture of the sofa that was given by Sarah Jane Hemsley, and that's Sarah Jane sitting on it. So there'll be somebody who will win that this evening. Picture of the 2021 crew, or the crew as it was the second last weekend. And on this one, it's Captain Moore with Chief Officer there, Gary Stevenson in their jackets in the middle, and then the full crew into their departments. Deck officers and deck crew. With a deck cadet, we had been contacted by the deck cadet there, who had just had a few days missing off his full sea time and could he therefore fill in Waverley. We normally we don't have much space to take extra crew, but fortunately someone that stayed in Glasgow, so he was able to do some days to get the sea time. And the engineer, Jim Whitelaw, Chief Engineer. Jim has now retired from seagoing service. Catering crew, with the second steward looking rather casual. On that occasion, it was 10, one of the 5 days of the season where we did have the full catering crew. And the one department of a purser. Now, recruiting the purser was quite last minute because we had set up somebody that was going to be coming as purser, and then they were unavailable quite late on. It was a quick ad that went on Indeed, and Purser Andrew replied, was interviewed very quickly, and before he knew it was on his STCW courses to get his safety certificates for operating the ship, and he fitted in very well. Didn't seem that long after starting, and it was even at the end of the season. Despite everything that happened in between, it still seemed remarkably fast, and the fan board's there for the final day of the season. A picture that I like because you've got Waverley coming into the pier. She looks proud, flags are up, high water, so she towers over the pier. She's got a large number of passengers on board and a queue of people eagerly waiting to join at Largs on the final day. And then at Tinnabrook on that same day, on her round Butte cruise, we had a short stopover at Tinnabrook Pier. And that gave the Pier Association an opportunity to sell some of their merchandise for funds towards the pier, which was really why it was put in, to give some time ashore. And a photograph of her heading back to Rothsay. And then evening, heading to Greenock. And then the blue lights of the Science Centre just reflect on the cream of the hull there. Kind of a distinctly evening shot, having tied up at the end of the season. So the season overall, 71 days operated. There was 7 cancelled sailings, all technical. So that was the 4 days because of the windlass shaft failure, 2 days because of the vacuum pump, and there was 1 day where one of the boilers wouldn't start, and unfortunately didn't get it started in time for the sailing, although it did start later on in the day. So that was 7 sailings lost through technical. 52,000 passenger journeys recorded. Total revenue from sailings, about 1.27 million. And these are just rounded figures, they're not audited yet. Just gives you an idea of how that's made up. The ticket revenue, catering and shop. And the catering shop do make surpluses, so they do contribute towards the ship's operating costs. That came out as an average daily revenue of 18,000. Now we'd started off by sort of setting a season up at 12. So she did manage to earn a little bit each day, but we do have a long period to cover in the winter. And the costs, so crew comes out as the biggest individual cost, over 350,000. Fuel over 250,000. Now the fuel price did vary quite a bit through the season. At its worst, she was just about £9 per minute steaming. So she is very expensive on fuel. Kate on the shop stock. Ongoing renewals and repairs. Berth and port dues. Marketing, printing. So just gives an example of some of the costs. And then the ship laid up for winter. Ship hall's a different feel. You can see there all the life jackets are taken out the lockers that are on deck, all stored in the forward lounge. Boilers were opened up quite quickly after we stopped. This is the port boiler opened up for inspection and then cleaning. We had started that before the COP26 event, still to finish both boilers off, but work is now focused on the engine for the time being. And that's Waverley sitting within the secure zone area at COP26. So she was just next to the green zone, which was the full sort of science centre area. And probably the most secure she's ever been, because even for Waverley Excursion staff to get access, it was quite difficult. We have started on deck repairs and winter refit work. You can see there are some deck repairs being done. Some of the rotten timbers that have come out. We are estimating 160 metres will have to be replaced this winter in deck timber, which is quite a step up from previous, but excuse me, we really do have to get in front of the deck repairs. further repairs required at the bow area where the seating has been covered. And it's still a traditional method of caulking the deck timbers, then pitch. Volunteers have started on the benches and sanding and scraping down the bench, particularly ones around the deck shelters. This is a never-ending task. It's a big task to get through. And the LP part of the engine is due for survey. You can see there the main connecting rod has been lowered down. This is heavy work. This is major heavy work, dismantling an engine of Waverley's nature. And that's underneath the platform, as it were, the LP cylinder at the back. Now, funding the current winter refit period has to come from a variety of sources. There's a surplus from the 2021 season. There's some company resources in hand. We have started making applications to trusts, charitable foundations. There's the Friends of Waverley regular donations that just keep coming in. Very grateful for those. We have now opened the 75th anniversary appeal with a target of raising 150,000 towards the ship's winter refit. We're estimating this winter refit will be about 450,000 in total cost directly on the ship. And then there'll be corporate and donations in kind. I hope as well. And we will also populate the Amazon wish list. It is back online on the open page on the website. There are some items on it, but we will continue to add to it as we need. And any support for that would be appreciated. Our online shop remains open. If you haven't yet bought your Eddie Waverley Teddy, 75th anniversary mug or the boiler book, your calendar for next year, or even a Waverley Dolphin, these are all available online. There's a new publication that's out now at print. We're expecting to post this out the week of 13th of December, and that's Jeannie Dean's. Now, 100% of sale of Jeannie Dean's books are going to go to Waverley. Its cover price is £25, but it's £29 including postage and packing. It is an A4 hardback, so it's a high quality publication. Now, Jeannie Dean's was Waverley's elder sister, and there was an attempt made to preserve Jeannie Dean's. And she is an illustration of what can happen if we don't continue to support Waverley and try and keep her going, because Jeannie obviously was broken up after 2 years of a failed preservation effort on the Thames. But that publication, all proceeds, as they go towards the ship. So it's a way of supporting Waverley if you would like to purchase a copy. As the 75th anniversary appeal is now open, if you can donate to that, it'd be very much appreciated. If you donate £75 or over, we will send away thank you gift as a poster. You can join Friends of Waverley online to give a monthly donation as small as £5.20. I can join the Paddle Steamer Preservation Society if you're not already a member, paddlesteamers.org. And until tomorrow, we have an online clothing sale of fleece, sweatshirt, polo shirts. Again, all proceeds from the shop also to the ship. I think that covers pretty much 21 in quite a sort of hour. There's also an awful lot has happened this year in order to get Waverley sailing. It is a whole team effort. It takes the office staff, all of the office staff and the ship's crew to make it happen. But we need support in order to be able to make it happen from yourself, those that sail on the ship, those that donate. You all play a part in keeping Waverley alive and preserving what is an absolute unique piece of maritime heritage. I'm very pleased to take questions. If you'd like to end up emailing any questions now, then you can email to questions@waverleyexcursions.co.uk, and I hopefully will receive some questions coming in. I'm very happy to answer any of these that do come in. One question I know that we've had into the company, which I could just pick up and answer, was there was a bit of concern over the Govan-Partick bridge, which is due to be installed in the coming years. Construction is due to start next year on that. We have been in liaison with the City of Glasgow Council in terms of developing procedures for how the bridge will work around Waverley. And I'm glad to say that that looks to be working well for all parties. So that should be okay, not much of a concern. There's also a second bridge coming in later on at Renfrew. And again, we've been liaising with the council there and how that will come in and be operated on the river. So if anyone has any questions, then please do email now and I will attempt to answer. I know another one that will possibly be likely is, will Waverley go south in 2022? And I'll just reiterate that we have planned every year to go south, with also 2019 being the boilers and 2020 being COVID, and this year being more the crew restriction. We are planning once again, and already we had members of the company, deck officers, have visited ports and piers on the south coast and Thames, as we look to plan the timetable for the 2022 timetable. So we do plan on returning south. I want Waverley to go south. And someone has just come in with a question there. Do you currently anticipate a full programme, including the Thames South Coast sailings? Yes, we have, and broadly similar. What we have at the moment is some charter inquiries, and I'm trying to tie them down so that we can then get the first part of the season information issued, because one of these charter inquiries is for a charter on the Thames for a period of 1 week, and that would possibly end up putting her on the Thames before the main summer season if she had to do that charter. So I'm currently trying to see if we can firm that up or not, because that will shape the start of the timetable. She is booked into Drydock around about the third week in April, and then thereafter hopefully until service in May. So that's one question. And another one here, any idea when the timetable will be available? We'll be going to the Western Isles. Yes, we know that people will want to be able to get accommodation booked for the Western Isles. As soon as we know with certainty that when the Western Isles will be, then we will issue the timetable. Even if I could just issue the outline timetable just to give you the dates, we'll do that. So we are working to get the timetable framework in place. The Clyde has already been drafted, the main Clyde, likely to start around the 16th of June for the main Clyde season, with it being her 75th anniversary of the maiden voyage. Just seeing if there's another question there. What do I see as the major challenges of 2022? I think crewing will remain a challenge. The key thing for me in order to start recruiting crew is to know the exact length of season. When are we starting? When are we finishing? Let's get the season timetable in place, and then we know exactly what we're recruiting crew for. We are currently advertising the post of Chief Engineer, a permanent full-time post to the company. If anyone happens to be watching that's interested at all, has the qualifications to be a steam Chief Engineer, we'd love to hear from you. But I do see that as being a major challenge is crewing again, but we will work the same way. Essentially, it's getting the officers in place, and then the ratings, it's just keep searching. We will review the wages that we pay, because it's got to be some value to them compared to other operators. There was a case this year where there was one member of the deck crew was offered a job several times while on Waverley, and he stayed with Waverley because we were just a little bit above on the wage. We were not certainly the highest by any means. Some operators will pay a lot more. And another question, any plans to return to Arica, Ardrishick and possibly Inverary? Ardrishick, yes, I hope so. It went well. There was no particular issues with using Ardrishick, so I would hope that we can return to Ardrishick. Arica, I think she's got to at least get up towards Arica for the 16th of June. It is a nice sail up to Arica, and it was certainly enjoyed this year, so we need to try and get it back. Inverary, ultimately, as you say there in the email, the person's emailed in here, no pier as of yet. If there's a pier, we'll try and get to it. It's a long way to Inverary, so it'd never be a regular calling point. But if there was a pier that was functional and Waverley could berth at it, then it's worthwhile taking it. Someone there, do you have hope of better crew availability in 2022? I constantly live with hope. We will try as hard as possible to make sure that we have the crew. I say by setting the timetable early, then that's, I think, a good start to be able to search for crew prepared to join the ship. Another question, who will operate the opening and closing the bridge? Will it be from Waverley Bridge or a wee man at the museum? No, what will happen is Glasgow City Council, this is talking about the Govan Bridge, Glasgow City Council will put it out to tender for the operation of the bridge, and then there'll be staff appointed. Any new destinations planned is a question. Always keen for, and if anyone has any suggestions where they know a pier in their area that you think Waverley could call at, I'd welcome any suggestions, because in the past, and PSPS members make suggestions of piers that they're aware of that might have been refurbished, reopened, but also keen to re-establish, although particularly say back on the South Coast and the Thames, one pier that we had, or port that we've been in touch with prior to the boiler issue was Poole, to get her back in there, at least for one sailing. Question there on Helensburgh, has there been any update? I don't have any updates on Helensburgh. If I was to pick a pier to reopen, it would be Helensburgh on the Clyde, because it does make, Helensburgh would make quite a good financial contribution, because after all, you normally operate to Helensburgh 2 days a week, and therefore, you're talking about maybe a couple hundred people picked up. Average on board spend, £45 a head. Start doing the sums, it's worth quite a bit of income, but we haven't had any update on any funding available to reopen Helensburgh. It is a Gelnbute Council owned, and the council have to have the funding in place, obviously, but there's no current update on Helensburgh. Someone said, years ago we went to Fleetwood. Yes, would it be possible to enter a destination from Liverpool? I was in Fleetwood not that long ago. I didn't think that it looked possible. Certainly silted up a lot more than what I had in the past. Liverpool is certainly easier from what I've seen, so I don't think Fleetwood's an option, and that's just having seen the place in recent times. Someone's asking, any chance of Millport Pier being restored? Even if it was, Waverley couldn't call if the flood defence scheme is built. That has been given approval by North Ayrshire Council, which would effectively put a breakwater across between the islands that Waverley would normally have sailed through. So if that goes ahead, which it looks to be, then Waverley can't get into Millport, and it would only be Keppel that she could use for the Isle of Cumbria, and she has done since 2014. And I'm still getting other questions come in. Someone's saying evening cruise Lars to Brodick a couple of years ago was very popular. Any thoughts on evening cruise from Lars for a couple of hours? Yes, that has been done previously with the PSPS evening charter, where Waverley has operated from Largs for an evening cruise, and that has always proven to be quite popular. It's not something we do regular, but it could well be back in the timetable. We'd end up trying to fit that in. It's still to be decided if there would be an evening cruise charter next year from Largs. Someone's asking a more technical question about the boiler being difficult to restart. I can't actually answer that one myself on what exactly went wrong on that occasion. Just into the control system playing up, and it just took a bit of time to reset it. But unfortunately, that time was after the sailing time, so the sailing was pulled. And if there's any other questions, I think I've more or less managed to keep up with them coming in. What I can do, if there was any other further questions come in, I can try and respond to them via email. So it might be better if I was to hand back to Murray. If I just stop sharing. Murray, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for your talk tonight. It's been absolutely wonderful to encompass so much of the recent history of the ship and the difficult and challenging times it's gone through in such a short but very interesting and very concise way, as I think everyone will agree, been absolutely marvellous. So in thanking you, I would also like to thank all your team in the office and indeed on the ship for all that they have had to go through. And I'm sure there's been some pretty torrid times for you all. Drydocks in themselves are, I used to always find them in my own work, my own ship at Drydock, very interesting, but very challenging. And you really didn't know what each day would bring. You can plan it all you want, but as you know, and know probably only too well now, that the challenges will come as and when, because it's only when you start to open things up, you realise some of the problems you have got. So well done for keeping it all together. And of course, all these things are both time and cost sensitive. And we all know that funding is not an easy option for us. But anyway, to everyone who's helped to soldier through that, and for yourself, and for also describing it so well, I thank you. And of course, there's other challenges too that you mentioned. The weather at Drydocks isn't always the best, and that doesn't help things. And of course, with the COVID restrictions at various different ways of having to do things, that's not made things any easier. So that, I think, is good that you were able to cope with all that. And crew problems, well, I have heard it said that when you've got crew, there's nothing but problems. But when you don't have them, it's an even bigger problem. And I think I understand that this is going to be an ongoing thing. And I think we all wish you well in resolving that. The fact is, I suppose, really that the ship no longer has a ready supply of people who are familiar with or qualified with the technology that it uses. And that is now presenting a problem, and will no doubt continue to do so. So we hope that people will come forward, and I hope there might be some resolution or some means whereby the MCA can perhaps accommodate other engineering disciplines with a little bit of perhaps extra courses or whatever. But sincerely, I understand where the problems lie, and I hope that that's something that can be addressed. It has to be addressed, and we wish you well with that. So a few technical challenges along the way, lots of interesting things, and lots of people who have helped in so many different ways. Suppliers who've turned up to help out with repairs, like to the air pump and the windlass, and a lot of goodwill from a lot of people coming forward to the ship. It has been a team effort. Funding is important, and as you have said, we do need more funding, and I hope people will do what they can when it comes to that. And like you, I sincerely hope the ship will be in a position to go south, and I look forward to joining it down there, as I'm sure many, many do. So Paul, thank you again for an excellent evening, for going over so concisely all the issues and the important events of the last year. And on behalf of everyone who's been listening tonight, I would extend as much as we can do in these circumstances, a hearty vote of thanks to you all. Thank you very much, Paul. Now, not quite finished tonight because I now turn to Gordon Wilson, and his charming assistant, and they are, I think, going to conduct the, hello Elizabeth, and I hope that they are now going to conduct the grand draw of all the tickets that were sold over the summer. Another great effort and a great contribution. And I would also, in doing so, like to thank Ken Darroch, who sold many of the tickets, for all the time and effort he put into this, and has led to the good position that the draw has left us in. So Gordon, without further ado, over to you.
Right, thanks very much indeed, Murray. As you've already said, the person that sold most of the tickets was Ken Darroch, and he was actually on board for 45 days over the summer selling the tickets. And at the end of it all, we raised £9,612 for Waverley. So thanks go to Ken, thanks go to those who donated the prizes, thanks go to everybody that bought tickets, and particularly we'd like to thank Sarah Jane Helmsley Upholstery, who donated the reupholstered sofa, which is the first prize. So in behind me here, there is a big red drum with all the tickets in it. So if my assistant is ready, we will draw the prize winners. So a quick spin first of all. There we are. Open up. And here we go. So this is the winner for the Aircall sofa. Okay, it's ticket number 9105, and the name is Quinn, but I don't think it's that, Mr. Quinn. It's a PA postcode. So I think that will be hopefully somebody that will give the Aircall sofa a good home. The next one is ticket number 4456. This is the winner of the Waitrose food hamper, and it's Simon Glenkenny or something like that, with a KA postcode. Right, the third prize, which was the bottle of champagne, is K. McKeever with a G61 postcode, ticket number 8507. Then we're on to the British sailing passes for 2 for 2022. This is J. McKinley, again a Glasgow postcode G53, ticket number 3676. The Waverley area sailing pass for 2, Lorraine Lister, a PA 19 postcode. That's ticket number 5844. So that's the Waverley area sailing pass for 2 for 2022. Robert Mullen is the next one. This is the £50 cash prize. Ticket number 3811, he's got a G81 postcode. And then we're going to draw 4 more tickets in reserve, just in case we can't make contact with any of the people that we've already drawn. So we've got ticket number 3631, that's a reserve one. Ticket number 1110. Another reserve one, 1319, and lastly 3632. Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, so we'll be notifying the winners directly. We'll also be posting the winning ticket numbers and the names on the PSPS website. Congratulations to them. That's the job done, and back to you, Murray.
Thanks, Gordon, and thanks, Elizabeth, for doing that. That was very good, and I congratulate all the winners and give thanks also for all those who have, over the course of the season, bought tickets and supported this very worthy draw. So thank you to Gordon, Elizabeth, and thanks to everyone for doing this. Well, that's really all we have for this evening, and it just remains for me to remind you that our next meeting will be on Friday, the 17th of December in Renfield St Stephen's Church. It will actually be in the church itself, not the halls. And on that evening, it will be a joint meeting with the West Highland Steamer Club, and the speaker will be Gordon Law, and his talk will be entitled 1970s Nostalgia. So I certainly look forward to that myself. I hope that you do too, and I hope there'll be a better night than it is out night. I can hear the wind whistling through the windows beyond me here, but I hope it'll be a better night, and that as many of you who can will join us on that occasion. But I hope that you also remember other meetings that we'll have in the future, whether they're face-to-face or whether they are virtual, and you're very welcome to join us, and we'll be pleased to see you with us at any of these. So once again, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and to everyone on behalf of the Society, I wish you a good evening. Thank you.